tomorrow will mark the 20th anniversary of an event that scarred the world, really, and it, in many senses, defined a generation, both politically and in many other ways. Not just, of course, the September 11th terror attack launched by Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, but subsequent attacks, including one upon my home city of London, that sprung from the same well of evil. Now, I mean, a few times over the years, I've shared with you, recently, really, my increasing worry that the danger of having to find a hot take on every subject every morning can be really unhelpful and really damaging. I've read this article in the Times a couple of times. I'm not going to read it to you, but it appears under the headline, "Awful Truth About 9/11, the Terrorists Won. The war on terror weakened America and cost far more in money, lives and foreign policy distractions than it gained." And not for the first time, I find myself a bit wary of going down that particular road. I'm not suggesting that whoever wrote it, the chap that wrote it, has overreached in the search for a hot take or, you know, what will get me commissioned? Let me say something really outrageous. And obviously, the time for contemplation and consideration is always anniversaries. We turn the clock back and we look back when anniversaries offer an opportunity to do so. We don't pick random dates in the middle of the calendar to recall something that happened 13 years and 223 days ago. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. That's the way the world works. The world turns. But it did make me start thinking, and I need you for this. This isn't one of those mornings where I either feel that I could wax lyrical for the straight 3 hours, play a full Steve Allen tribute act and not take a single call between now and home time. It's really not one of those days. But neither is it one of those days where I want you to ring in and just sort of chew the fat. I don't know how the world has changed, and nor do you. I don't know what 20 years after the event we can say wouldn't be real or wouldn't be here or wouldn't be normal had that dread event not occurred. But I do know that the world is different as a consequence of that. And there will be two lenses of looking at that issue. One would be through the general lens, the macro lens, the objective lens. How is the world? Well, I feel differently about this and that and the other. And of course, we behave differently, whether it's, security on aeroplanes for a long time, traveling internationally, the world changed. Even the continuing inconvenience of having to empty out your hand luggage and make sure you weren't carrying any specific liquids or quantities, little things, but changes. The world changed. And then there's the subjective, the micro, the personal, which would be, if you are a Muslim, I imagine that your answer to the question of how has the world changed, how was the world changed by the September the 11th attack, would almost certainly be very different from a non-Muslim. And then, of course, within the strands both of Islam itself and of individuals who are ostensibly part of the same religion, but when push came to shove, wouldn't really agree about anything in the way that I am a Catholic, but I wouldn't agree with the Pope on some issues. I hope I don't get struck by lightning for saying that at 7 minutes after 10. So how has the world changed? What changed for you? And what changed for everybody? So I'll open up the phone lines now. I've got some thoughts of my own, but I've got that one article just bubbling in the background, that idea that actually the changes visited upon the world in the aftermath of September 11th, 20 years later, people perhaps, forgiven is too strong a word, I can understand how perhaps people would look back and say, the terrorists won. I wouldn't say that. I think I'm emotionally unable to say that. And maybe it's cowardice on my part, a refusal to even contemplate that possibility. I find it too egregious, too vile a thought. But I've read the article twice and it's reasonable and well reasoned. The changes, the expense, and of course, Afghanistan. It is the 20th anniversary of September the 11th that was set as the deadline for the withdrawal of troops. And what have we seen as a result? We've seen the Taliban, which offered shelter to Osama bin Laden and to Al-Qaeda, assume the reins of power. That's an ugly thought, but it's a real one. 20 years later, we have essentially just evacuated a country and put the people who were in charge 20 years ago back in charge. Essentially. Al-Qaeda are no longer a threat. ISIS still is. There's a sort of touch of the Judean People's Front of Judea going on in that part of the world, and it's rather hard for people who don't pay full attention to work out where is an enemy's enemy is my friend, and where are alliances, and where are factions and sectarian divides. But you can say, I think, without any risk of contradiction, that the people who were in charge back then are now in charge again. I don't like that question of what was the point. I hate the thought of the sacrifices made, particularly in Afghanistan, being rendered redundant by the new reality. And I don't think we need to go down that path today. But you've got Taliban being the legitimate government of Afghanistan, ISIS waiting in the wings. This is a text that's already come in from Ben. I think the article's correct. The Taliban's recognised as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. ISIS are in the wings seeking a similar role in governing a country. What has been achieved, I don't know. But as I said, I don't necessarily want to go down the Afghanistan route exclusively or too early. I am more interested in you. Just as a relatively trivial and light-hearted aside, I work with people who were 4 on the day that happened. I have colleagues who were still in single figures on September the 11th, 2021, and I don't know what relevance or resonance the event has for them. If you were at school, so if you were sort of 9, 10, 11 years old, it would have landed. It would have been discussed. It would have been poured over, perhaps. If you weren't, I mean, you won't even be aware of it. It would be some vague background noise, although you'd have been conscious of some deep sense of mood change in the house, your parents struggling to deal with it. I was on telly the next morning. I was doing a daytime show on Channel 5 that was usually quite light-hearted. It was a sort of precursor to the one that Jeremy Vine does now. And, sort of manufactured debates and all that sort of thing. And I can't really remember that morning because it would just have been autopilot. There would have been no manufactured debates, I don't think. It would just have been a shared sense of shock at what we had seen on our screens. And it still is. It's not one of those things that has become easier to process with the passage of time. When you watch the planes hit the side of the building, the shiver, the shock is... Obviously, it's not the same as it was when you saw it for the first time, especially if you were watching it live. And the disbelief. The only thing it's ever reminded me of is the Hindenburg airship, when I think it was Walter Cronkite, the broadcaster, and he said the words, so the airship caught fire and everybody in it was therefore imperiled. And he said, "Oh, the humanity." It was a moment of... Well, I was about to say it was a moment of epic humanity, but that'd be a bit dozy, given that was the word that he used. But it was a moment of epic clarity. The mot juste. Oh, the humanity. You saw those planes hitting the side of that building, and that was the thought, whether you could articulate it as well as Walter Cronkite or not. That was the thought. Oh, the humanity. That is people. That is you and me. There but for the grace of God, or whatever it may be. That is a rupture in our reality. That is something so completely at odds with what we consider to be normal and predictable and even perhaps prosaic, that it doesn't make sense. I cannot understand it. And I still can't. So how did the world change? 0345 6060 973. I'd love to hear from Americans. Is America a country now that it never would have been were it not for the September the 11th attack? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I think it's a bit it's a bit mealy-mouthed of me to quote that newspaper headline and then say, I don't want to talk about it. Of course we have to talk about it. That's the uncomfortable thought. That's the elephant in the room that many of you are picking up on already. How did the world change? Is it fair to suggest that the forces of evil, the terrorists, I'm not taking calls today from people who want to challenge the description of Al-Qaeda and the terrorists as evil. I did for a while. I did a few years ago, but not today. It wouldn't be right. But is the analysis accurate or fair or correct? 0345 6060 973. And if you have a particular connection to that moment, if where you were or what you were or who you were or what you did is something extraordinary, then I would love to hear from you as well. The way that the echo comes down through 2 decades, not every day, but on a day like today, and perhaps even more so on a day like tomorrow, that echo is unavoidable. It is loud. But most of all, I want to know how you think the world has changed. Herb Morrison, I beg your pardon, not Walter Cronkite. Nobody's perfect. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. What changed, both for you and that will be a very personal and undeniable position. I can't argue with you about what changed for you, how you feel. But then as a matter of opinion, what's different about the world? I hate the way that completely innocent Muslims... No, let me rephrase that. I hate the way that my society remains fractured. I hate the way that September the 11th, as the terrorists wanted, created wedges, divisions and suspicions in our society on this side of the Atlantic, whether the July the 7th attacks had happened or not. I hate the way that everybody brown, let alone everybody who identified as a Muslim, suddenly became suspicious to other members of my society. I hate the way my profession, I hate the way the media has stoked those fires for clicks and money. I hate the way that desire to sow division and to sow mistrust and to sow hatred was taken up by organisations like the English Defence League and individuals whose names I don't need to mention. Not just the ones who are now languishing in disgrace, but also ones who still enjoy profile and renown in the British media. I hate that. I hate the way that they took up the invitation from the terrorists to sow hatred and mistrust, and did so. I hate that. But who wouldn't? 0345 6060 973. That's a huge change. That's a huge change in society. I know that we had scapegoating and we certainly had racism and bigotry, all of that before any of us had ever heard the words Al-Qaeda, but I look at the last 20 years of my life and my career, most of which has been spent on this radio station, talking every day to you about issues that are encompassed by the conversation we're going to have today, talking about Islamophobia, talking about the rise of the far right, talking about the rise, and when I say the far right, I would include Al-Muhajiroon alongside the English Defence League. To me, they're two cheeks of the same backside, but of course to the subscribers to those views, they're sworn enemies embarked upon an existential battle. I hate it. I've always hated it. And I think that's probably the biggest change I can note from where I sit. What's the biggest change in the world since September the 11th, 2001, from where you are sitting right now? It's like a secondary trauma, James, says this text from Kai. It's why I can't watch a documentary on it anymore, because the images are as graphic today as they were back then. You rightly compared it with the Hindenburg disaster. I would put Hillsborough and Grenfell in the same bracket. So would I, actually. The difference being, of course, that the other three tragedies, Hindenburg, Hillsborough and Grenfell, were not deliberate. Nobody set out to wreak that sort of carnage. And that's why September the 11th remains close to unique, I suppose. 21 minutes after 10. How did it change the world? 0345 6060 973. How did it change your world. This briefly from Julie in Suffolk. You can't bomb away angry resentment and an extreme ideology. Every death of an innocent bystander reinforces the propaganda of the terrorists who see themselves as freedom fighters and holy warriors. And to refer again to that article in today's Times, it's hard to argue that Islamist extremism has been fatally wounded. The Taliban's victory just in time for this 20th anniversary is not just a cruel reminder of the continuing threat, it offers powerful incentive to its fellow ideologues who have been enduring players in the horror story of the past 2 decades. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, ISIS-K. Zachariah is in Ealing. Zachariah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time caller. I usually don't call in and only listen.
Okay.
I felt like calling in because basically almost my active memory started when this happened. At the time when this happened, I'm actually from Afghanistan. We fled the war with my family.
Okay.
Moved to Holland at the time. I remember the day that this happened, I was at a friend's house and I wasn't aware of really what was going on. Went home, then my parents explained to me what was happening. And immediately the day after, actually my dad got insulted by a child, being a neighbor of ours. And
how old were you, Zachariah, at the time?
I was 10, 11.
You're 10, 11 years old.
Yeah. So we literally lived in Holland for like 2 years at the time,
Okay.
1.5, 2 years. Just being a kid. But after this happened, I felt like the world had a bad guy to look at.
Yes.
Being Muslims. And
So you'd fled the Taliban?
Yeah.
And then in the aftermath of the September the 11th attacks, in the eyes of your Dutch neighbour, you were part of
They
it.
knew we were Muslim, and they were like, okay, they said something Muslim as to our end, basically. And we were confused, but okay, and that basically set the tone. Me being now 32, I feel like from that moment on, my world changed in the sense that whenever anything has happened, I have to explain to people, I'm not like that, we're not like that, in general, we're not like that. And, I don't know, you walk around always feeling like, okay, in a way you're being looked at differently because of this event, and obviously all the other events that followed. And, I don't know, it's just a personal, how I experience it.
Of course.
Yeah, and, it's just,
And that happened overnight. That happened overnight, and although it's dissipated somewhat and diluted somewhat, it's not gone away, has it?
No. When being a child, just at the time being 10, 11, your only concern is to play, go to school, have fun.
Of course.
After that, there was an extra thing to carry, basically, because now you are a Muslim. Especially in the beginning when this happened, it was Muslims did this, and everyone would ask you. Being a child, even you would be asked, okay, why did this happen? And, how can you answer that?
It would be like me being asked as a Catholic to account for the Spanish Inquisition or the actions of the IRA, wouldn't it, really? I mean, I haven't got a Scooby-Doo, but it doesn't matter, does it, once that thought is afloat? I ask you a question that you wouldn't have been expecting to answer this when you rang in, but I'm just interested in your opinion, and that's all it will be. I'm quite clear about that. I'm just looking at a headline. Number 10 confirms new, quotes, turnaround tactics for Channel migrant boats. It's what the public want. So the idea that if someone who's escaped from Afghanistan in the last few weeks were to find themselves crossing the Channel in a ramshackle dinghy, then the calculation by the current government is that the British public would want that dinghy to be turned around and for the people in it to take their chances with the rolling ocean. Do you think there would be a warmer attitude towards the people sort of following the route out of Afghanistan that you took all those years ago?
It's desperation, isn't it? And people leave out.
But would there be a warmer attitude towards? I mean, it's such a hypothetical, this, because arguably, if September the 11th hadn't happened and the invasion of Afghanistan hadn't happened and the capitulation to the Taliban hadn't happened, then the current refugee exodus wouldn't be happening. But just in emotional terms, do you think September the 11th changed the attitude to people fleeing Afghanistan, even though they were fleeing, in one sense, the architects of the actual atrocity?
I think because of what has happened, in a way I feel like refugees from Muslim countries are almost seen as less human. So I mean,
that's really strange, isn't it? You run away from the thing that we have rightly taken against sounds too mild, and yet the people running away from it are polluted by the geographical or the religious association with the people that we should be hating or we should be fighting.
I think it's just, the media, not all media, of course, but in general, the media doesn't help. And it's always nice to have a bad guy because, it's like a movie. I always see life is a movie. There's always a movie always has a bad guy, and everyone hates the bad guy. And if someone tells you this is the bad guy, or this group is the bad guy, or people from this area are part of the bad guys, then, if they do want to come, then
that's it. They're going to be, they're going to get booed when they walk onto the stage. What about the subsequent military action? How did you feel? I know you were very young, but you would have spoken to your parents and you would have thought about it subsequently.
I think I'm not too aware of. I don't remember too much of my parents' opinion at that, but I know they were like in the middle in a way.
Yes.
Because obviously they fled the Taliban, so they were happy that something was happening against them.
Sure.
But they were also at the same time worried because it was a war happening, like an active war.
Yes.
Of course, at the time, it was already not safe. But I mean, if, bombs get dropped and everything. So they were also concerned at the same time about the people that are still there.
Of course.
So it's like, in the middle. In that sense.
It is a rock and a hard place. Zachariah, thank you. I'm glad you felt compelled to ring in today. It's a really crucial and important perspective on it that reminds us all of something that has changed. Look, whether you like it or not, whether you are comfortable with this sort of demonisation or not, whether you are somebody who supports Priti Patel when she essentially tells refugees and asylum seekers to sod off. You can't deny that has probably been influenced by the events of September the 11th, and that for a government to think that the British public backs it when it says to the successors, to people like Zachariah, not here, mate, off you go. It is, I don't know, it's probably too much of a reach to say that's what the terrorists wanted, but they certainly didn't want the West to be perceived as a warm and welcoming liberal place where, we prioritised equality and decency and supported feminism and did all of the things that I used to think were in our DNA. The terrorists wanted us to be unpleasant and unkind, because that, of course, adds to their mythology about how evil we are. So it's unfortunately a very important part of the conversation, whether you like it or not. It's coming up to 10:29, coming up to 10:30. 03456060973 is the number you need. Do you think if it happened now, we'd have another war on terror? It just depends, doesn't it, on which fires were stoked and which buttons were pushed. What changed? Asked Steve in Monmouth. The war on terror, soundbites issued by Bush. He felt the only option he had after those abhorrent attacks, and thought that all he could do was drop bombs on Arabs. These are Steve's words. Didn't really matter which Arabs, but he had to be seen to do something. The thinking that you could bomb ideas out of people is insane, yet we, quotes the West, continue to follow the huge defence companies. You only move forward by talking and spending time with people. We, the public, always want quick, simple answers. That's not always possible. Well, 2020 hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? But, the support for action against Afghanistan or in Afghanistan at the time was huge. I suppose one thing, small mercy, I can only at the moment see one text suggesting that it was all some sort of inside job or hoax. Do you remember the way that took hold at the time? Was that significant in the way that the world changed? If you think today, I was walking up Whitehall yesterday, and there's still a big poster up opposite 10 Downing Street saying COVID is a hoax. And when I was a kid, it was people who thought the moon landings had happened in an aircraft hangar in East Grinstead. I exaggerate slightly, but that proliferation of conspiracy theories I didn't really see as a kid. I didn't really see as a younger man. And then the epic effort put into trying to portray the September the 11th terror attacks as being some sort of inside job or hoax or part of a conspiracy, that was really remarkable at the time. Would we have people claiming COVID is a hoax if the September the 11th terror attacks hadn't opened the doors to people claiming that those terror attacks were a hoax? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm drawn today to the question of what has changed, what has shifted, because we can never answer that definitively, but we can, I think, contemplate the question together. And if you want to join in, I'd love to hear from you. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. A couple of people unhappy with my depiction of the current government policy regarding people who would be fleeing from Afghanistan with the usual nonsense. And I bear you no malice for believing this crud, because you're spoon-fed it by much more high-profile media figures than I am. But any sort of claim, why are they trying to come here? France is safe. France processed 3 times as many asylum applications as we did last year, and it granted twice as many places. So 93,470 asylum applications in France in 2020 compared to the UK's 36,041, and there were 19,130 successful applications in France compared to 9,115 in the UK. So if you've got a problem with the so-called migrant crisis, then that's fine. But don't dress it up in lies about numbers or the UK shouldering more than its fair burden. Because while we're talking about burdens, Germany accepted 62,470, Spain accepted 51,055, Greece accepted 34,360, France 19,130, Italy 11,585, Switzerland 8,620, and the UK 9,115. So, you know, you can talk in the UK about the possibility that our vicious, carefully cultivated, bigoted attitude towards refugees, stoked up, of course, by people like Farage and his fellow travellers. You could say that's partly linked to September the 11th, but the whole world watched September the 11th, and most countries don't manage to be as vile as much of our commentariat and political establishment has become over the last few years. 10:37 is the time. Liam is in Shrewsbury. Liam, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. First-time caller, so a little bit nervous.
Don't be.
On 9/11, I was actually... I worked in the events industry and worldwide, so I was constantly flying around organising conferences in most countries you can think of.
Oh, yeah.
But on that Tuesday, I was in the dentist, and I was just watching it on a screen in front of me whilst the guy did my teeth.
Good grief.
Yeah, I know. It was absolutely horrifying, and I got out of there and went home as soon as possible, just trying to comprehend what had happened. And it was only later that afternoon that I realised my friend Michelle was organising the conference in Windows on the World that day.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and so it was a very difficult thing to confirm because she was actually doing it for another company at the time. And so, I was just constantly trying to call her because we were supposed to go out for drinks on the Thursday later that week when she got back. And I could never get through. And then eventually I was actually on the train going home in London, and in the Evening Standard, I read that she was running the conference and she was one of the missing people. So that's how I found out. I had to get off the train and go see a friend because I couldn't go home and didn't want to be alone.
Of course.
But that's what happened, and she was one of the people that obviously never came home.
What was she like, Liam?
Oh, she's very bubbly, fun, fierce, always very supportive, liked a beer or two, loved her kids. And, she was great fun to travel with. And she was a good friend to anyone who really knew her.
It's strange, isn't it, that you listen to The World and His Wife talking about this in the most hushed and serious of tones, correctly, because that's how we feel. And yet for you, it's personal.
Yeah. So I mean, you asked the question, how does it affect the world? Affect people. Well, my industry immediately got hit very hard. Thousands of people who worked in conferences and training lost their jobs because no one was flying.
It's easy to forget that, actually. And I don't have 2020 memory on this. Did we stop flying altogether for a while, pretty much? Did we really just limit foreign travel? I mean, I know it became a lot harder, but you wouldn't have. Would your industry then decided, well, there's no point having a conference on the other side of the world, or?
Well, the economy was tanking a fair bit already by that point because the internet bubble had burst, if you recall.
Okay.
And 9/11 just tipped it over the edge. But yeah, no one's flying, no one's going to conferences. It equals, huge redundancies immediately, and then actually a fear about attending conferences in the near future. So it was pretty economically. It was very difficult. But anyway, subsequently, I did get back into work. So I lost my job too, by the way.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It was, happens.
It's relative, isn't it?
Yeah. So, and then I worked since 2005, literally, again, all over the world, Asia, Africa, America, Middle East, you name it. People in events, some of us just used to live on aeroplanes, basically. Yeah. But the thing that became really noticeable, and I've got Arabic family, by the way, as well. My stepmother is Jordanian, just as a reference point.
Yeah.
But I think that 9/11 helped, or secretly allowed people to justify being a little bit aggressive towards people of a different skin colour. And you could feel it wherever you went. You can feel it in different interactions around the world. And I think that's the awful legacy of it, if you ask me.
I think I agree with you, actually. I don't particularly want to. And I think in the interests of fairness, I should say that even those of us who don't think that we are part of that particular problem probably did have, certainly in the early days, slightly different reactions in certain contexts, especially after July the 7th. I made a big thing at the time about getting back on the tubes and getting back on the buses. But then if a chap of Asian appearance with a big backpack got on, it would cross your mind in a way that it wouldn't if a white bloke with a big backpack got on. So I guess it's what you do with those knee-jerk reactions, isn't it? It's whether you indulge them and ferment them and grow them and let them build up inside you into bigger irrational hatreds and responses, or whether you recognise them for what they are and try to blow the flame out.
Yep, exactly.
Did you keep in touch with Emma's family?
Michelle's
family.
No, I don't. I didn't ever know any of her family. It was just purely professional friendship, really.
Sure, and that is why you think of her first on the mention of this anniversary, this tragedy. Liam, thank you, mate. 10:43 is the time. 03456060973 is the number that you need. What changed? That's an emerging theme. Obviously, it's something I feel and something I fear. What about you? Other stuff? I mean, sitting where you are today, thinking either about how you were changed by this horrible event or about how the world we share was changed. The second one's harder to answer, isn't it? Because you don't know for sure. You don't know for certain. And I'm not of the view personally, and this isn't a criticism of anybody who might be of the view, I'm not of the view personally that today is the day for contemplating the wisdom of the military response. We've touched upon the uncomfortable fact that the Taliban is back in power. It's now the legitimate government of Afghanistan, which makes it pretty hard to justify elements of George Bush's and Tony Blair's so-called war on terror. But the notion, I'll tell you how the world has changed, in my opinion. Joe Biden looks at the last 20 years of American engagement in that part of the world, and he thinks we shouldn't have been there. We shouldn't have been there from the moment that Osama bin Laden was taken out. So September the 11th plus aftermath plus repercussion plus ramification equals Joe Biden's decision to surrender America's role as the world's policeman. I think that is actually quite a significant change. Without the September the 11th terror attacks, there would have been no war on terror. And without the war on terror, the current president of the United States of America would not have reached the conclusion that leading future wars on terror and similar is not their job anymore, is not their role, is not what they or who they want to be. September the 11th terror attacks. Thinking on that point there with Biden, actually, during the break, I think that is, I mean, in the context of world history, the full vista of 100-year, 200-year analyses, that's probably significant, isn't it? America would not now launch a war on terror, would it? If it were to happen again? Not on this particular watch, certainly not under the last president either, or possibly the one before, I'm not sure. But that role seems to have shifted. I think it has. Again, I'm not sure, but nobody can be sure about anything. This is a sad text. James, I remember the day after the July the 7th attack, I caught a train and the old couple in front of me just moved to the next carriage. Then when I arrived at Central Station in Liverpool, there were police bag checkers at the ticket barriers and bloody Granada news cameras were recording me while I was searched, while my bags were searched. The footage rocked up on the news later on. I felt destroyed when that happened, and from then on I hated authority. That's when the phrase racial profiling appeared in our conversations, isn't it? And we used to do phone-ins. I can't remember whether I did, probably. Is it reasonable to search all young men of Asian extraction? So for the benefit of American listeners in this country, when we say Asian, we generally mean from the subcontinent, sort of, so India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. I know that in America, you think of people of Chinese or Japanese heritage, so it's important to clarify that. But we would have phone-ins. It's perfectly reasonable to treat all people of that ethnicity as if they might be potential terrorists, and there's no point at all searching other people. And sort of Richard Reed came along, the so-called shoe bomber, didn't he? But yeah, that was. I think this is. I don't think it's wrong to focus on that big change, because it is the one that still resonates through our society. 10:51 is the time. Sharon is in Caterham. Sharon, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
I think
Sharon.
I have spoken to you in the past.
You think you have? I'd like to think you'd remember, Sharon.
I know I have.
Oh, well,
I
that's
know
a
I have.
relief. I'd like to think I was marginally more memorable than a maybe.
Oh, no, you were very memorable. I was trying to make a long story short, but being Irish didn't work.
No, go
anyway,
on.
I'll try harder.
Thank you.
I worked up in a family centre on Bravington Road in those years, Rainbow Family Centre.
Okay.
And I worked with a lot of families with children with disabilities, and in that area there were a lot of Muslim families across the Edgware Road, across the whole of Westminster.
Yes.
And on that day,
That's why you said Bravington Road, just for the people
Yeah,
that
'cause I know
confused.
where you come
Because
from.
I
I
used
know
to
where
live. I used to live round there, so I do know exactly
right.
where you're talking about.
Yeah.
Go on.
So I was going up to visit a family of a young girl who had just come through major heart surgery in the Brompton Hospital.
Oh, yes.
And I think it was Professor Jacob or something. I remember his name. Yeah. So anyway, I had just arrived up there, and I was sitting with the family. I won't mention the name, obviously. And the little lady had just come through life, surgery. And I was thinking, isn't this amazing? Like this was pioneering surgery.
Yeah.
And I was sitting watching a family celebrating life. I had just held her hand, and she was looking up at me. Her name was Miriam. And next thing, the nurses came in, and we were going, what? And in 1 minute, you were looking at this miracle of life, supporting a family, and the next, this comes up on the news, right? So we're like, panic sort of hit, because we were thinking, what's happening in the world? Like, is this
Of course.
And then my phone goes from people in Dublin, Sharon, where are you? Because obviously living in London, they were thinking, are they hitting sort of cities of significance for some reason? I was going, well,
Right.
anyway, the panic I felt, and I thought, I have to get out of here. I have to, not be on a train. And I left, went home. So I remember it like that. And also, something you said earlier with a caller, I remember when the bomb went, the bin in Victoria Station was bombed, and the tube line, and I was coming home that night from the same area, coming from that area, and I had to get off a tube to try get on a bus to get back to the South London where I lived.
Right.
And I got on a bus, and I went to pay my fare, and the busman said to me, or the bus at the time, he made a derogatory remark about, you bloody Irish, what are you doing getting on this bus? Same
Really?
thing.
So it came back, because it bubbled back to the surface in the aftermath.
Yeah, and and I just thought to myself, well, I can sort of feel, and I worked with those families for years up in that area, and I remember what they felt after, supporting them, going, I did visits across the whole of London, and I remember those families telling me what it felt like for them after that, how they felt, in those times.
And that's a parallel I drew, isn't it? So for people confused, I was a bit confused myself there for a moment. The Victoria bombings, the station bombings, and the... It was Paddington and Victoria. That was in 1991. That was the Provost, wasn't it? That was the provisional IRA.
That's right. Yeah.
So he was blaming you for the actions of the. And there it is. There's the parallel right
but
there.
The thing is, unless I opened my mouth, well, I do look Irish. I've got red curly hair and freckles, but you wouldn't necessarily know that, to be honest, unless I went, "Hello, how are you? Grand." Do you know what I mean? And as I got on the bus, and I thought, I can understand what that, but I'm a little bit more protected because unless I actually speak legally, and then I remember. So when they say you remember days in your life, it was like, do you remember when? Like, well, I wasn't old enough for JFK, but you remember those things, and you remember every minute of it. And I also remember being at that same children's centre and got off the Edgware Road tube to get the 18 bus down to Bravington Road. I was only in work 10 minutes when that other incident happened.
July the 7th one.
Yeah, that. Yeah. And I remember that going, oh my Lord, and walking home that day, having to leave the centre, the children that were coming in on buses. I remember the team coordinating children not coming into the centre. Everybody, were told to stay in, don't go out until we knew.
Remember.
So all of those things, and it's just funny when there's three things you hear there. One, what happened on that day, and I can remember the time. You go from
the miracle of Magdi Yaqub. That was his name, Magdi Yaqub. There we go.
I couldn't forget the miracle of life. I knew it was Yaqub, but
that was it.
The miracle of life. To then see this, then to see the prejudice,
and then the aftermath, and then the echo, the empathy that you can muster up because of the Irish experience when the IRA were in there.
Yeah, and just the horror of this, and I wouldn't have thought sitting here 20 years on, some of that stuff is still as prevalent as it is then.
You had a lot going on, you see. I mean, most of us would just have been watching the telly, but you were already caught up in a moment of high emotion, and then along came these images on the telly, so I'm not surprised. And clearly you're a very empathetic person as well, so that's why. There's a million reasons why things resonate across the years, but the sheer scale of the tragedy and the loss, I think more so perhaps than the July the 7th, even though it was closer to home, because those pictures remain so prominent, not just in our memory, but in the now, in the moment. Sharon, thank you. Take care. And Simon in Wimborne in Dorset. I'll have to be brief, which feels a bit inappropriate in the circumstances, Simon, but what would you like to say?
I think it's had more of an effect on America, because America had never experienced terrorism on their own soil. And
it had. I mean,
but not to this.
When was the Oklahoma bombing? Was that before or after? But not foreign terrorists.
No,
it had homegrown terrorists. Yes.
And there was a large section of the Irish community that 1 minute would be putting $1 in a collection box in Boston, the next minute you had 9/11. They're both. One supporting IRA and the other one is Al Qaeda. They're both disgusting, but I think it channeled their mind.
Do you?
And I think
still an awful lot of support. So the peace process followed, perhaps as a result. I mean, this is a silver lining of sorts in that it changed the. It's a bit of a reach, actually, Simon. I'm a bit confused about the sort of prioritisation of this point.
Well, I don't think America had never really experienced foreign terrorism. There was, like I'm saying, there's a section that would support something that was going on. No,
I understand what you said. I understand what you said. I'm not struggling to comprehend. It's just an interesting prioritisation of points. I mean, you might be right. Maybe the momentum, the impetus for the Northern Irish peace process, in which, of course, America played a huge role, would have been different if they hadn't had an experience. If that's what you're saying, then that's a really interesting insight. That idea that the experience of foreign terrorism changed some American, and the Irish-American lobby is strong in America, attitude towards terrorism on our soil as opposed to on theirs, and changed their view of the IRA from freedom fighter to, more correctly, terrorist.